Bella Vista glowed with a quiet charm that seemed untouched by the rush of the city outside. The wooden beams above carried the warmth of age. The polished tables reflected the amber light of shaded lamps, and soft jazz drifted through the air, as though it had always belonged there. Customers spoke in low voices, savoring their wine and the slow rhythm of a Saturday evening. At the heart of it all was Sarah Mitchell. To anyone watching, she was simply the elegant owner, moving calmly between tables. Auburn hair resting on her shoulders, green eyes bright with welcome. Few noticed the posture held too straight for comfort, or the measured way she placed each step. Her doltex rested unseen beneath her blouse, hidden away like a secret she never intended to share. For Sarah, this place had become her sanctuary. After 22 years in uniform, 15 of them in special forces, she had chosen this restaurant as her second life. The folded napkins and the aroma of basil carried none of the weight of combat, yet discipline remained in her every habit. She still rose before dawn, still trained each morning, still carried herself with the alertness of someone who had spent decades in places where a single mistake meant the end. She smiled for her guests, but behind the smile was vigilance she could not discard. That evening, 2 young women entered, pushing the heavy door open with laughter that carried the lightness of freedom. Emma and her friend Sarah were both 22, college students celebrating Emma's birthday. They had chosen Bella Vista because of its reputation for beauty and because the restaurant offered an air of safety and celebration. Their innocence was clear in the way they leaned close together over the menu, whispering and giggling, unaware that their very presence would soon become the focus of someone else's attention. Sarah Mitchell guided them to a table near the center of the room, lit a single candle for Emma, and wished her a happy birthday with a smile that reached her eyes. The candle flickered softly, a symbol of joy and youth, but also of fragility. In the far corner, another party had settled in. 6 men, all dressed in tailored suits and watches heavy with gold, filled a table with the loudness of those who had never been told no. Their laughter came sharp, and their gestures wide, spilling into the space of others. At the head sat Marcus Wellington, 28 years old, heir to a fortune made in steel and construction, athletic, tall, and confident to the point of arrogance. He radiated the easy dominance of someone accustomed to being untouchable. His friends mirrored him, each eager to show their own wealth, their own boldness, their own disregard for restraint. Sarah Mitchell saw them the moment they entered. Her years of training had left her with instincts that ignored the surface and measured the core. She saw the flushed faces, the restless motion, the signs of alcohol's grip. She noted the way Marcus's eyes moved across the room, not with curiosity but with ownership, as though every person present existed for his amusement. Nothing had happened yet. No rules had been broken. But in Sarah's mind, the map of risk was already forming. On of the risk was already forming. WW. 6 men, intoxicated, seeking attention. 2 young women, vulnerable and new to the city. It was not a battlefield, but patterns of danger were patterns all the same. Emma laughed when her friend leaned close to whisper something, the candlelight glinting across her face. She was unaware that Marcus had already noticed her. Sarah Mitchell stayed by the kitchen doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, appearing to watch the staff, but in truth, studying every motion at the corner table. The music still played. The food still smelled of garlic and wine. Yet beneath the warmth, a shift had begun. It was subtle, but to Sarah, it was unmistakable. The night had opened as a celebration, yet beneath the laughter of the rich and the innocence of youth, she felt the first stirrings of unease. It was the quiet before the wrong kind of storm. And though she told herself this was civilian life, not the field, her instincts refused to quiet. The evening was no longer entirely safe. It was a stage where something dangerous waited to emerge, and she alone was ready to see it coming. Marcus raised his glass and called across the room, his voice breaking the flow of the jazz music. He offered champagne to Emma and her friend, insisting they come to his table. The girls tried to ignore him, lowering their eyes to their plates. But his friends joined in, their laughter carrying through the restaurant like jagged edges. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her fork. Sarah Mitchell noticed it from the doorway. Her expression remained calm, but the soldier inside her shifted awake. Marcus pushed back his chair with deliberate noise and approached. His height and build made him seem larger than life to the two young women seated together. He leaned forward, his smile sharp with arrogance, and asked again why they sat alone when he and his friends were right there. Emma forced out a polite refusal, her voice thin. Sarah Mitchell walked forward, her tone gentle but firm, as she asked the men to respect her establishment. Marcus turned to her with disbelief. In his eyes, she was only a middle-aged restaurant owner, beautiful but unthreatening. He laughed, turning to his friends to share the joke. The tension thickened when Marcus declared that as paying customers, they could sit wherever they pleased and talk to whomever they wanted. His friends cheered him on with smirks and jeers. Sarah Mitchell's voice remained level as she told them to return to their table. Her words were measured, almost too calm. Yet they carried a weight that made the air heavy. The laughter faltered, but Marcus pressed harder. He stepped closer to Emma and reached down, his hand clamping around her wrist. Emma gasped and tried to pull away, her chair scraping against the floor. That single act broke the fragile line Sarah Mitchell had been walking. Her tone changed instantly, the sound of command honed by years of authority. "Remove your hand," she ordered, her voice no longer soft but sharp, resonant, the kind that left no room for argument. Marcus sneered and shifted his other hand toward her shoulder, dismissing her with a half-formed insult. He never finished the word. Sarah's body moved before most realized what was happening. She caught Marcus's arm, twisted it with precision, and forced him face first into the table. Plates shattered, glasses toppled, and food scattered as his friends froze in disbelief. In one seamless motion, she released him and pivoted toward the next man who lunged forward. An elbow strike connected with his sternum, followed by a sweep of her leg that sent him crashing to the floor. Gasps erupted from the diners around them. The third man rushed from behind, but Sarah anticipated him, ducked low, and used his momentum to hurl him directly into Marcus, who was still reeling against the broken plates. Both fell in a heap. Two more advanced together, desperate to overwhelm her. Sarah's movements were exact, her strikes calculated. One man folded after a blow to the solar plexus, the other collapsed from a swift strike to the neck. Chairs tipped. The table split under the force, and the once serene restaurant had become a battlefield of noise and chaos. Only one of the six remained standing. Panic stripped him of courage, and instead of rushing forward, he pulled out his phone. His voice shook as he announced he was calling the police. Sarah stepped toward him, calm and steady, and plucked the phone from his hand. She placed it back on the table in front of him and said with chilling composure that he could make the call after they finished the lesson. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. That was the time it took for Sarah Mitchell to dismantle 6 grown men in front of stunned guests. When it ended, she was not breathing hard. Her hair was not mussed, and her eyes held the same composed focus they always did. Around her lay broken plates, scattered silverware, and 6 men who had thought themselves untouchable. She looked down at them with the same calm she used when welcoming guests to her restaurant. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, "I would like you to pay your bill and leave." The crowd sat in silence, their eyes wide, struggling to process what they had just seen. Emma clutched her arm where Marcus had grabbed her, trembling but safe. The candle on her birthday table still burned, its small flame flickering stubbornly in the disturbed air. Sarah Mitchell stood tall in the center of it all. An ordinary woman moments ago, now revealed as something far more formidable. Marcus Wellington sat in his father's office with his arm in a sling and a bruise spreading across his jaw. His words spilled out quickly. mixing anger with humiliation, as he described how a woman had thrown him to the floor and broken plates across his back. James Wellington, a man whose empire of steel and construction contracts had bought him power across the city, listened with narrowing eyes. To him, Marcus's story was more than embarrassment. It was an insult to the family name, a wound to pride that could not be ignored. When his son muttered that she had moved like a professional, James's face darkened. He picked up his phone and began making calls. The first strike came 2 days later. Inspectors from the health department arrived at Bella Vista without warning, clipboards in hand and voices clipped with authority. They examined every corner of the kitchen, swabbed surfaces, measured refrigerator temperatures, and flipped through records. Sarah Mitchell stood calmly beside them, apron tied neatly at her waist. Answering their questions with precision, they left with no findings. But the report filed in city records carried the note of suspicion, as though something might yet be uncovered. The following morning, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the tax authority. An audit had been opened on Bella Vista's financials, citing irregularities. Sarah placed the letter on her desk, the paper heavy with bureaucratic menace, and smoothed it with her hand. She knew her books were in order. Years of discipline had taught her never to leave loose ends. Still, the process itself was punishment. Hours spent compiling files, interviews with auditors, the constant shadow of accusation. The third day brought noise complaints. An official notice claimed that music played at Bella Vista exceeded permitted levels. Sarah walked through her dining room that night, listening to the soft jazz drifting through the speakers. The sound was gentle, barely above a whisper. Yet her license was suspended pending review. The laughter of her customers seemed quieter in that silence, but she refused to let her voice falter. She welcomed each guest as if nothing had changed. By the end of the week, Marcus himself returned, this time with his lawyer at his side. They served papers announcing an intention to file assault charges. His smile was smug, as though the weight of the system was already crushing her. Sarah read the documents without flinching, then placed them on the counter beside her folded apron. She looked at Marcus with the same calm she had used the night of the fight, and told him his dinner was not welcome here. The pressure mounted like a tightening vice. Yet Sarah moved through her days with the same composure she had carried through distant deployments. She tied her apron each morning, polished the tables, checked the ovens, and oversaw her staff. Her Doltex rested beneath her shirt, pressing lightly against her skin, a reminder that she had endured harsher trials than this. Inspections and audits were weapons of a different kind, but she recognized them for what they were: power being used as intimidation, a battlefield where paper replaced rifles. Emma and her friend Sarah visited one evening after the last customers had left. They found the restaurant dimly lit, chairs stacked on tables, the floor freshly swept. Emma's voice trembled as she asked if the rumors were true. If Bella Vista might be forced to close, she confessed she had not slept since the night Marcus grabbed her wrist, the memory of his hand still burning her skin. The younger Sarah admitted she feared they had caused all of this trouble by being there. Sarah Mitchell set down the ledger she had been reviewing and looked at them with quiet steadiness. She reminded them that none of this was their fault, that blame rested solely with those who had chosen intimidation. She told them courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand firm despite it. Her words carried the weight of someone who had given those same reminders to soldiers far from home, under skies filled with danger. The girls left comforted, though still shaken. Sarah returned to her work, closing out the night with deliberate motions, apron folded with care, lights switched off one by one. Outside, the city pulsed with the influence of men like James Wellington, who believed wealth could silence truth and bend rules at will. Inside Bella Vista, the air still carried the faint echo of jazz, and the woman who had once commanded on battlefields now commanded something quieter but just as unyielding. The war had changed form, but Sarah Mitchell had not. The phone rang late in the evening. Long after the last customer had left Bella Vista, Sarah Mitchell was still in the kitchen, polishing a stack of glasses, even though the shelves already gleamed. She hesitated before answering, expecting another bureaucratic voice, or perhaps another veiled threat. Instead, a familiar tone carried across the line, steady and commanding even after years away. "Colonel Mitchell," General Robert Harrison said, his voice clipped with the authority of a man who had once commanded entire operations. For a moment, Sarah could not speak. She had not heard that voice since her retirement ceremony, and the weight of memory pressed against her chest. General Harrison did not waste words. "A little bird told me some rich kids are giving you trouble," he said. Sarah found herself smiling despite the storm that surrounded her. She asked how he had heard, and he replied that ears never retire. Even when the uniform is hung up, he explained that James Wellington's name had crossed federal desks before, tied to procurement contracts that did not add up. The FBI already had their eye on him. Sarah, leaning against the counter with the phone warm against her cheek, told the general not to interfere. She insisted she could handle herself, that her fight was hers alone. Harrison listened, but his silence carried the weight of disagreement. When he finally spoke again, his voice softened. "You've carried more than enough. Sarah, you don't have to stand alone this time." She closed her eyes, humbled by the loyalty she had not asked for, but had never truly lost. When they ended the call, she set the phone down gently on the counter, staring at it as if it were a lifeline pulled from the past into her present. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of refrigeration units. Yet she felt the invisible presence of comrades who had never forgotten her service. That same night, Police Chief Michael Torres sat in his office, reviewing files. The overhead light cast sharp shadows across the cluttered desk, where stacks of reports had grown heavy with dust. Torres had once been a young recruit in a military training program where General Harrison had shaped his outlook. Loyalty, integrity, discipline lessons that still guided him, even in a civilian badge. When Harrison called him earlier, asking him to take a closer look at Marcus Wellington, Torres had agreed without hesitation. The file in front of him told a story the city had long ignored. 15 complaints tied to Marcus harassment, assault, abuse of power. Each one had been quietly closed, dismissed through influence and money. Torres read the pages slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. He could almost hear Harrison's voice reminding him that silence in the face of abuse was its own betrayal. Torres marked several entries with a pen, circling the patterns of dismissal. For the first time, the case was being seen by eyes unwilling to look away. The next morning, the Wellingtons still believed their grip unshaken. But subtle shifts had already begun. A federal investigator quietly requested additional financial statements from the Wellington firm. A local judge returned a call to the police chief that he had ignored before. The machinery of influence had slowed, and in its place, another kind of network stirred the quiet, unseen loyalty of those who had once worn the uniform or learned under its shadow. Sarah, unaware of the details, continued her work at Bella Vista. She folded napkins, checked deliveries, and prepared for another evening of service, yet somewhere inside she sensed a change. As though the ground beneath her had steadied, her past was no longer just a memory carried in dog tags beneath her shirt. It was alive in the respect of those who still watched over her. Bonds forged in hardship had not broken with time. They had only been waiting for a moment to prove their strength again. It began with whispers in local veteran circles, quiet retellings of the woman who had stood her ground inside her restaurant and sent 6 arrogant young men sprawling. Someone mentioned her name at a meeting hall. Someone else repeated it over coffee at a firehouse. Within days, the story carried on voices and across phones, each retelling sharpening the same point. Sarah Mitchell, once a colonel, now a restaurant owner, had defended 2 young women when no one else dared. The phrase Bella Vista veteran surfaced online, first as a comment, then as a hashtag. By the end of the week, it was trending. The first to arrive were the oldest men in their 70s and 80s, veterans of Korea, leaning on canes and walking slowly, made their way to Bella Vista. Sarah looked up from the counter one evening to find a group of them standing at her door. Their coats were worn, their eyes tired but resolute. One of them asked if there was a table for a few old soldiers. She guided them in, her voice soft with respect. They sat together beneath the amber light. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt her burden lighten. Soon after came the Vietnam veterans, still carrying the shadows of a war that had never fully left them. They spoke little, but their presence filled the room with quiet gravity. Then the Gulf War generation arrived. Men and women in their 40s who brought their children to sit at the tables. Iraq and Afghanistan veterans followed, young are still, some barely a decade older than Emma, their tattoos and unit patches peeking from beneath rolled sleeves. They all came with the same purpose: to sit, to eat, to make Bella Vista their ground. Sarah watched as uniforms no longer worn mingled in her dining room, the sound of forks and laughter binding them together. Her tables became more than furniture. They became equal ground, where every service era met with respect. She moved between them with her apron tied neatly, offering wine, serving pasta, and feeling the weight of her community settle around her like armor. She did not ask for it, but it came, and it gave her strength. Outside her doors, word spread further. Firefighters came in groups, badges catching the light as they raised glasses to her. Police officers filled booths, some remembering the same training fields she had once walked. Ordinary citizens followed, drawn by the story of a woman who had reminded the city what courage looked like. The dining room that had once seated 40 now overflowed. Reservations stretched weeks ahead. Bella Vista had become more than a restaurant. It was a symbol. While Sarah's tables filled with laughter and loyalty, the Wellington Empire began to crack. FBI agents moved through James Wellington's offices, carrying boxes of files and computers past stunned secretaries. Headlines splashed across newspapers about procurement, fraud, and tax evasion. Television anchors spoke of corruption and arrogance brought low. Banks called in loans, stock plummeted, and contractors refused meetings. The empire that had once seemed untouchable folded with every revelation, fragile as glass under pressure. Marcus, once loud, with swagger, disappeared from the clubs and parties. His friends, who had stood beside him in suits and gold watches, found themselves unemployed, their family fortunes eroding in the tide of scandal. The same city that had once bowed to the Wellington name now whispered it with contempt. Wealth had crumbled. Connexion dissolved. But Sarah's restaurant stood brighter than ever. At night, Sarah walked through Bella Vista when the last customer had gone. She touched the edge of a table where Korean War veterans had rested their canes, and another where young Iraq veterans had laughed with their children. She saw the medals pinned to jackets, the quiet handshakes exchanged across generations, the unspoken understanding of shared sacrifice. She understood then that the fragility of money could never stand against the durability of respect. The fight had lasted only minutes, but the aftermath had stretched into something far greater. Sarah Mitchell had not sought attention, but she had become the center of a community that had found itself in her strength. Real power was not measured in dollars or contracts. It was measured in dignity, loyalty, and the voices that rose together when one of their own was threatened. The door to Bella Vista opened quietly on a gray afternoon, and for a moment, Sarah Mitchell thought it was just another customer arriving before dinner service. When she looked up from polishing a glass, she froze. Marcus Wellington stood there, not in a tailored suit or with his usual entourage, but in worn jeans and a plain t-shirt. His eyes carried none of the arrogance she remembered. Instead, they were heavy with something closer to shame. He approached slowly, stopping near the counter as though afraid to step further. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice subdued. It was the first time she had heard him without bravado. He admitted that his family's wealth was gone. The FBI investigation was tearing through everything. But that was not why he had come. His words faltered, then steadied. What we did to you, what I did to you, was wrong. I didn't see it then. But I see it now. Sarah studied him carefully. Her apron was tied at her waist, her dog tags resting unseen beneath her blouse, and her expression calm but piercing. She asked him the question that had weighed on her since that night. If you had known who I was, would it have mattered? Would you have treated me differently if you had known I was a colonel? Marcus looked down at the floor for a long moment. When he raised his eyes again, they glistened. No. He admitted. It shouldn't have mattered. Respect shouldn't depend on status or title. We should have shown it to you. To those women. To everyone. We failed. The silence in the restaurant stretched between them. For the first time, Sarah saw not the wealthy heir who had once tried to intimidate her, but a young man stripped of illusions. She nodded once. Not with triumph, but with recognition of his honesty. Then here is your chance, she said. Respect is earned through service. If you mean what you say, you and your friends can work here. Start in the kitchen, at the sink. Learn what it means to build something with your own hands. Marcus blinked, startled by the offer, then nodded. The next day he returned with his friends, not in silk or gold, but in simple clothes. Sarah handed them aprons and pointed toward the dish racks and sinks. The clatter of plates and the hiss of hot water became their new rhythm. Each movement stripped away the remnants of entitlement. In the kitchen of Bella Vista, wealth offered no advantage. Dignity came only from the work done well. Weeks later, Emma and her friend Sarah returned to the restaurant. They had both been carrying the memory of that night, the terror of being surrounded, and the relief when Colonel Mitchell had stepped forward. They found her at the counter and thanked her, their voices still trembling slightly. Emma admitted she had replayed the moment Marcus grabbed her wrist 100 times, wondering what might have happened if Sarah had not intervened. Sarah Mitchell placed a hand gently on her shoulder and told her that fear did not make her weak, that standing her ground, even in silence, had been its own kind of courage. The young women left with gratitude shining in their eyes. But the reminder lingered for Sarah herself. Courage was not only in combat or in commanding orders, it was also in quiet acts, in the willingness to protect strangers, and in the humility to begin again after failure. She returned to the kitchen that evening to find Marcus scrubbing dishes, his sleeves rolled, steam rising around him. His friends worked beside him, carrying trays, wiping counters, moving with the clumsy diligence of men unused to labor, but determined to learn. Sarah watched them for a moment, then turned back to her own tasks, the dog tags pressing lightly against her chest. She understood then that redemption was possible, but only when pride was shed and service embraced. Bella Vista no longer felt like a single restaurant tucked into the corner of an old building. The walls that once marked its limits had been pushed back, the neighboring shop remodeled and opened, doubling the space. New tables filled the expanded floor, each one set with simple silverware and warm light. The sound of voices now carried like music, not from any speaker, but from the blend of generations and backgrounds sitting together. Veterans in worn jackets with faded patches shared bread with young families. Police officers and firefighters traded stories with students. The dining room had become a mosaic of the city itself, drawn to the same place because of the woman who quietly moved among them, apron-tied and smile steady. Sarah Mitchell felt the weight of this transformation every night as she checked on her guests. She was proud, but not in the boastful sense. Pride for her meant watching people who would have passed each other on the street sit together as equals at her tables. She never hung medals on the walls or spoke of her service. Her dog tags remained beneath her shirt, brushing lightly against her chest as she carried plates or poured wine. They were a reminder that service had many forms, and that what she built now was as meaningful as anything she had done in uniform. One evening, General Robert Harrison arrived quietly. Without an entourage or announcement, Sarah found him seated near the back, enjoying a simple plate of pasta. When she approached, He rose and greeted her with the respect of a soldier acknowledging another. He told her that he was proud, not only of what she had done in her years of command, but of what she continued to do here. He reminded her that leadership was not confined to rank, that true service extended into the way one carried themselves in ordinary life. His words settled into her like a benediction, quiet but deeply felt. Beyond the restaurant's walls, the story of Bella Vista spread. National headlines carried her name, describing her as the veteran restaurant owner who had stood up to bullies and sparked something larger than a single fight. The photographs showed her in her apron, not her uniform, surrounded by customers who treated her as their own. The image contrasted sharply with the headlines about the Wellington family. Their downfall filled the financial pages with details of fraud and arrogance undone. Wealth that had once seemed unshakable now appeared small compared to the resilience of one woman and the community that rallied to her. Marcus himself appeared on television months later. Dressed simply, without the polish of privilege, he spoke of his mistakes. He admitted to arrogance, to cruelty, to believing that money made him powerful, and then he told the story of how Sarah Mitchell had offered him something he had not earned, but desperately needed a chance to work, to rebuild his dignity through service. He spoke about washing dishes, about humility learned in the steam of the kitchen, about understanding that respect could only come through action. His words surprised many, but they reflected the same truth Sarah had seen when he first returned to her door. Emma and her friend Sarah continued to celebrate birthdays at Bella Vista. Each year they reserved the same table, the one where fear had first gripped them, now transformed into a place of joy. They brought flowers, laughter, and gratitude that never faded. Each time, they reminded Sarah Mitchell that she had not only protected them, but had given them the courage to carry themselves with more strength in their own lives. As months passed, the rhythm of Bella Vista settled into something steady and enduring. Each morning, Sarah opened the doors, checked the deliveries, and tied her apron. She greeted her staff with the same calm tone she once used for her soldiers, guiding rather than commanding. Each evening she walked the floor, serving meals, clearing plates, and sharing quiet words with those who sought her presence. To most, she appeared as a restaurant owner, but those who knew her story understood that they were watching a different kind of hero. Heroes, she reflected, were not always marked by uniforms or medals. They could be found behind aprons, behind counters, in classrooms, or in firehouses. They served not for recognition but because it was in their nature to stand up when others could not. Sarah Mitchell's battlefield had changed, but her mission had not. The legacy she left was not just of one fight in a restaurant, but of a community that learned respect mattered more than wealth, and that dignity, once shared, could never be taken away.